Good morning, David. Good afternoon, I should say, and welcome to another episode, preview episode, but of course, for our sponsor exclusive show. How are you this morning, David?
I'm very well, Jason. Good to be with you.
It's very good to be with you. Everybody knows I've been working on all these upgrades to the studio here, and there's so many things that are just constantly, it's amazing. We go live and things behave differently than when we're preparing. David, today you're asking an important question about spoliation vectors. Do people know what that is?
I don't know if they do, or at least it's a technical term where you are entitled, we the people, if that's a fair description, are entitled to an aggressive inference of guilt if we find that people have removed, added, or manipulated evidence at a crime scene on the basis that normally precludes one's ability to do a crime scene investigation if the evidence has been removed. And of course, but the absence of evidence or evidence of absence is not, so absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, right? Just because information has been removed. So we have a picture that we now, or our regular listeners will be quite familiar with, of a group of people outside the Pentagon, and they're moving across the Pentagon lawn in interesting ways. And you've looked at that clip and you pointed out a number of anomalies. But for myself, what I see there, this is very soon after the attack on the Pentagon, which killed everyone inside the Pentagon's US Navy Command Center. And then we have this, and your expert trained eye has noticed a number of anomalies, right, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, most notably is this totally clean piece of metal, which strikes me as something that should be covered with burn marks and grease and dirt. And all this other stuff back here by the wall that looks like it's just been set up there, no logical explanation as to how a plane crashing into the building off here to the right would spread totally clean, seemingly prop debris all over the corner of the building there.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a classic example where our eyes are seeing an act of spoliation. The guy's wearing a rather ill-fitting FBI T-shirt, which I believe was handed out from the hotel where these people were assembled the night before the attack, right? And they're moving in, and the woman who's wearing rather ill-fitting trousers, they're carrying away evidence from a crime scene. There's no yellow tape. We're told it's an act of terrorism, but before determining whether it's an act of terrorism, we should assume it is an act of a criminal organization, a highly organized criminal organization. So at my website, Reverse CSI Scripts, I've tried to offer through a template that can be downloaded what I call a spoliation vector analysis. So it's a 2-page document, which, I've got it there, but it can be downloaded, that lists 10 patterns that I believe can be used to describe or break up a scene that has been targeted for spoliation into 10 acts, right? So when people download that, and then we're going to see an amazing picture very soon of a piece of steel taken from ground zero that has a Bible fused to it. So I hope, and I'm not being presumptuous here, I'd like to give our listeners a little bit of homework to do. So during this part of the show, I just want to describe why that appears to be anomalous and indicative of spoliation, if you will, because that is evidence that was taken from the crime scene, put in a museum, but it was never analyzed, as far as I can understand, forensically. Now, this is an amazing picture because what it is, it's a Bible that is fused to a congealing lump of steel. Now, what state the steel was in and what state the Bible is in when those two objects came together is interesting. But what's fascinating is when steel melts.
Wait a minute. Before you say that, David, you've just reminded me that, boy, I don't know what's going on here. You just reminded me that last night you and I were having a conversation where we were supposed to, you wanted me to guess at what would cause that.
Yes, and you told me that you didn't want me to tell you what I think happened. Now, my hypothesis is yet to be proven, and it may be wrong, But for what it's worth, I do have a background in explosives and thermodynamics, and I'm an engineer. So when I see that rather anomalous situation of a Bible that is unburnt, fused to steel that presumably at the time it got fused, the steel, or at least the surface of the steel,
But
was
don't reveal
melted.
too much because, David, remember, I was supposed to guess. So let's just talk briefly about what you and I had discussed last night with regard to this thing, because you presented it to me with some excitement. And what we
Yes.
decided was, I have no idea how. The question, of course, David, is how can a paper Bible survive the heat required to fuse it inside this molten steel? And initially, I had no idea how that could occur. But what we're going to do is, David, I will offer a guess, and then during our sponsor exclusive show, which is going to begin at 11:30 a.m. on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsource the truth, and subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth. You'll reveal what the real reason is. But the only thing that I could think of, David, is that if the steel were melted, molten liquid steel, so that it was, say, 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and it encountered the Bible, the only way that I could imagine that it would not burn up the Bible is if it were so hot that the liquid steel surrounded and encased the whole thing, and as quickly as it heated it up, it starved it of all the oxygen that would be required to burn the paper. But I guess we'll have to
Now
wait
that is a
until
very
11:30 until
yeah.
you tell me if it's right or wrong.
Now I can't tell whether it's right and wrong. I'll give you a hypothesis from my background,
For now
and
or
I think
for
you're going
during
in.
the sponsor show?
Yes, and I'll give you a few clues, right, and I'll share those with the audience because this is associated in my mind with the attempt to bring the towers down in 1993,
Huh.
where Ramzi Youssef built a bomb, right? And so what I invite people to do is to find out what ingredients were in Ramzi Youssef bomb to see if they might have also been used on 9/11. Because Ramzi Youssef said, give me more money and I'll bring them down next time. Now, the idea of spoliation vectors is you follow all of the players and all of the weapons and all of the signals intelligence through the crime scene in and out to determine if they come together with a rational explanation of how this, why did Ramzi Youssef fail to bring the towers down in 1993? He wanted to bring one tower down into the other and knock the other down. So people need to know what happened to Ramzi Youssef. Well, he was put in ADX Florence by a woman called Christine Marcy, and that is highly relevant. But anyway, backing up.
David, sorry. Look at this picture of Ramzi Youssef. What do you think about this? How do his eyes look to you?
Well, they're blue. No, I don't know that matters.
Isn't
But
that odd for an Arab guy to have blue eyes?
yeah. But you know how meaningful that is. I mean, he might have a mother who's a Scandinavian and a
Doesn't look like
father
he has
who's
blue eyes here. It looks like someone with contact lenses in. Doesn't look like real blue
well,
eyes to me.
right. But that's possible. Anyway, the bomb he built did something to the basement of the Twin Towers or the building that he, tried to blow up. And Donald Trump went around that area soon afterwards with the man who engineered or designed the World Trade Center. This is 1993. And Donald Trump, interviewed after 9/11, said it was amazing because there were columns completely missing inside the building, but it was still standing because it's actually what is called, I think, an exoskeleton. That is to say, there's a framework of girders on the outside, like a cage, that give it enormous strength. So Donald Trump, after 9/11, said there had to be explosives in the building. So when I hear this, I'm saying, well, Mr. Trump or President Trump, you said there was explosives beside the building after 9/11. What have you done about it? Anyway, I digress. Let's
Fair
back up
question.
now and say, okay, so a spoliation vector would be a signal, for example, sent from the BBC's spoken text display apparatus for the generation of TV signals. So that's one of the patents on my download, because I think if people understand that that might be used to generate spoliation vectors, I think they might be able to understand how Jane Stanley in New York on 911 reported that the Salomon Brothers building had come down or collapsed, even though behind her left shoulder it was still showing on the skyline. Now, she's what's called a script kiddie. She has no freedom to do anything other than read the script that is put in front of her. What appears to have happened is that the television signals generated by her display apparatus was intended as to send a spoliation vector to the crew that had been positioned to blow up building number 7, or the Salomon Brothers building. So I think what happened on 911 is at least three members of elite secret society called Kappa Beta Phi should be quizzed to determine whether or not they could have sent spoliation signals or spoliation vectors to three British companies. I repeat, British companies: Bovis, Amec, and SERCO. Now, Bovis is extremely interesting because Bovis built the 911 memorial. And I'm saying to Americans, why did you outsource the construction of the 911 memorial to the British company Bovis? Because that would have given Bovis access to forensic evidence down in the basement, right? That might have told people what kind of explosives were used to bring the towers down. And it certainly wasn't the gas inside a 100-ton plane that would burn, probably with the lack of oxygen, at around 600 degrees Fahrenheit, and could not even begin to affect the structural integrity of a building with 200,000 tons of structural steel in it.
Mm.
Right. So we have three people, members of Kappa Beta Phi.
David, let me pause here for a second before we go to those people, because we are a little low on time today. You've got an appointment to get to, so we're only going to be here on YouTube and Periscope and Facebook and DLive and all these platforms for another about 8 minutes before we transition over to our sponsor exclusive show on Patreon and Subscribestar. We do have a guess from some of our viewers in the chat. Lefty Lucy is saying, with regard to this Bible that's frozen in the molten steel here, and incidentally, we have other viewers who want to know what verse is there. I don't know if we can see that from this image, but perhaps someone knows what Bible verse is.
I can tell you that one of the words there is retaliation. So Bible experts will know where that's coming from. I think in my vestigial memory, it's something like Matthew anyway, but it talks about turning the other cheek, right? So I find this evil beyond belief. That is to say, the one page from the Bible is basically sending a message to the American people, and maybe Christians in particular. Well, we've hit you to hell. We've killed 343 firefighters. All we want you to do now is turn the other cheek. Isn't that a little bit like the message that comes from that statue outside Broadcasting House, where you have a naked, sexualized boy, Christ, being crucified? At least that's his posture. And a couple of angels, at least I assume they're angels with wings. And the book, the text that's on the book, right, that's held in the vicinity of his private parts, has got the word obsculta, and thanks to one of our listeners who told us what that meant, where obsculta means listen and obey. And I think the Bible, right, when we find out, and I'm ready to be corrected, but I'll offer my explanation in the next part of the show as to how this could happen, where the Bible gets fused to the steel without burning. This, I believe, is pivotal and spoliated evidence that will tell us who really brought the towers down, who really killed 343 firefighters, who really killed 658 members of Cantor Fitzgerald on the North Tower. And so we have Wilbur Ross, we have Michael Bloom. Ah,
Hang on.
okay, all right. Sorry.
So we got
Okay,
Wilbur
all right.
Ross. You want to question these guys, you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. I want to question these guys because they are all members of Kappa Beta Phi. So we have Wilbur Ross, who's now the Commerce Secretary, whom you quizzed about the Patent Office, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have Michael Bloomberg, who's just dropped out of the Democratic candidacy for president and put his money, which is estimated at $49 billion, behind Joe Biden. And then we have Larry Fink, who's the chief executive officer of my mind's gone
BlackRock.
blank. Wait a moment. Yeah, BlackRock Inc. Right, where BlackRock Inc. is the world's largest shadow banker, which with its sort of twin, which is Vanguard, generally controls up to 10% of all of the companies, including the three British companies I'm talking about, and the defense contractors Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon on 911, which would have been given an order, potentially, or a spoliation vector, to be in a certain place after the attack. So Amec is outside the Pentagon and in or near the debris piles of building number 7, taking away evidence of a crime. That is called spoliation. You have SERCO meeting on the 47th floor of the North Tower with its shareholders that would include, presumably, Larry Fink of BlackRock. And I think they were staging a live action role play. Right? So we have Larry Fink of BlackRock. We have Amec that had offices in Vancouver immediately above the offices of Starnet Communication. And Amec, together with Bovis and various other companies, was installing fiber optic links and wireless and data links inside the World Trade Center that could have been used to trigger the explosives and other kinds of devices that might have created this bizarre act where a Bible is fused to a lump of congealing hot steel. And I think we'll see my explanation in the next part of the show. But I think the audience will, if they may, if I can ask them to do a little homework, download that template, and we'll see you in the Patreon part of the show.
Yes, and before we go there, David, sorry, this is where people can get it. If they go to reversecciscripts.com and click on the free downloads tab, that's going to take them to the licensed vector analysis. Before we wrap it up here on YouTube and Periscope and Facebook, we're also, David, our show now, as we've spoken about the past few weeks, is also available as a audio-only podcast on iTunes, on Spreaker, on Google Podcasts. I'm pretty sure we're on iHeartRadio now. So there's a lot of people that are hearing these previews, David, and I want to make sure they know they can hear your in-depth analysis and our conversations during the sponsor exclusive segment. It's an audio-visual presentation. So for people who are listening to the audio-only podcast, they're going to want to check out patreon.com/reversecsi storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Some of our viewers who are with us in the live chat, David, are suggesting that that Bible fused with steel may possibly be explained by something called the Hutchinson effect. Now, I'm not familiar with this, but this is something that we can look at much further in the sponsor exclusive show, which is going to start just 10 minutes from now. So, David, I'll see you there on Patreon and Subscribestar, and we can continue to explore these spoliation vectors.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, everybody, for watching.